这里是解读君的频道，这里不会浪费你时间。
I just want to talk about the new book, The Pursuit Economy. Okay, I think you should great ambitions to describe the whole economy. You just combine the trend with the cycle. So you just describe the three stages,
right?
And you just promote the concept of the pursuit economy. So what's your definition of this concept, and what's the difference between the traditional one?
Well, first of all, let me get back to the basics. How does the economy grow? Well, we measure economic growth by the amount of expenditures. What that means is that someone has to be spending more than he's earning for economy to grow. Right? If everybody's spending exactly his income, GDP will be stable but won't grow. For the GDP to grow, someone in the economy has to spend more than what he's earning. What makes the person spend more than what he's earning? Well, there has to be that means borrowing is required. But for a person to borrow money, there has to be good reasons for it. And that this project that this person is borrowing money for makes lots of money. So that's my fundamental starting point in terms of economic growth. That there has to be money-making opportunities for people to want to borrow money. And when these people borrow money and spend, they end up spending more than their income. And that's how the economy will grow. So if you start from that point, how are these money-making opportunities created? And my observation, as someone who was born in Japan, went to elementary school there, then moved to the United States when I was 13. Japan was a very poor country when I was growing up there. But then moved to San Francisco, United States. Wow, it was doing very well. Everything was beautiful. But just 10 years, by 1977, 78, Japanese companies were beating American companies left and right. And so many American companies went bankrupt. So then the Japanese became the top guy in the world for 20 some years. And then I'm in Japan now, working for the Nomura Investment Bank. So I looked at the pattern of these basically four countries, Japan, US, Taiwan, South Korea, and China. And says, wow, every country seems to go through the same process. So I tried to put that thinking together with this fundamental notion that you have to have money-making opportunities for economy to grow. That suggests to me that at different stages of economic development, the amount of money-making opportunities changes. That's my fundamental observation. In what I call the urbanization period, or in what I call the golden era, there are plenty of money-making opportunities. Everybody wants to borrow. Interest rates are relatively high. People hopeful because they think they can make a lot of money. But once you reach a certain level where someone else, some other country, you can make more money than at home, then the things begin to change. And that's what I call the pursued economy. Pursued economy means the return on capital is higher abroad than at home. And once you reach that stage, the businesses have to change their mindset completely, but the governments also have to change their mindset completely, because the usual policies do not work. The kind of policy that worked well during the golden era might not work very well in the pursued era.
I got it. So in your context, you think all the developed countries are already, most of them are pursued economy, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you just define the three stages of the growth model. So now we're talking about the business cycle. Okay, you just give the four scenarios. Scenario 1 and scenario 2 is very traditional. You use the monetary or the physical policy, you can handle that. But especially in the pursued economy, in the scenario 3 and the scenario 4, so it's maybe the monetary policy is in vain. So you just recommend other, especially the fiscal policy. What's your point of view of that?
So for the benefit of the people who are watching this program, let me explain what those scenarios are first. If you need borrowers to get the economy to move while someone is saving money, if someone is saving money, someone has to be borrowing money to keep the economy going, right? If everybody saved money and no one borrowed money, the economy will collapse.
May I just interrupt a little bit? Because you're saying that there must be saving, then there will be borrowing. They happen simultaneously. But there's a new skill of the money printing. For example, most of the treasury bill or notes just purchased by the central bank. So how you describe that situation?
Can I answer that question later?
Sure.
Because it comes back in.
Yeah. Okay.
But I have to explain the fundamentals first. So if someone is saving money, someone has to be borrowing money.
Sure.
And people like us in the financial sector will take the money from the savers and give it to someone who can use it.
解读君备注：最近，辜朝明的观点引起了大家的注意。辜朝明先生是野村综合研究所的首席经济学家，在1984年加入野村之前，辜先生是纽约联邦储备银行经济学家以及美联储理事会的博士研究员。基于对美国大萧条和日本失去的30年的研究，辜先生是著名的资产负债表衰退理论的鼻祖，曾为多位日本首相提供咨询。对于中国来说，这就像北京、上海、苏州、深圳的房价都下跌了87%，一切都下跌了87%。美国在1929年到1933年的大萧条期间经历了类似的事情。你可以看到美国失去了多少？从1929年到1933年，美国 GDP 下滑了46%。这几年美国损失的财富基本相当于美国1929年全年的 GDP， 而日本因资产价格的变化而遭受的损失相当于日本1989年 GDP 的3倍，也就是说日本的损失是美国的3倍。但是如果你看日本的 GDP， 你会注意到日本的 GDP 从未低于泡沫时期的顶峰水平，无论是名义上的还是实质上的。所以我认为这是日本塑造的奇迹之一，没有太多人注意到这一点的重要性。但正如你所看到的，与美国在大萧条期间发生的事情相比，这是一个巨大的进步。稍后我将向你们解释这一点的重要性，因为这会对中国未来可能经历的事情有一定的启示作用。资产价格不断下降对日本公司的影响很大。我们继续看下去吧。
To make sure that all the saved funds are borrowed and spent. And when there are too many borrowers, interest rates are raised by the central bank. Too few borrowers, interest rates are lowered by the central bank to make sure all the saved funds are borrowed and spent. That's the usual economy. That's the what I call textbook economy.
Yeah.
So in that case, there is plenty of borrowers, plenty of lenders. And that's what I call case one.
Case one.
Case two is that there are plenty of borrowers, but not many lenders.
Yeah.
And this can happen when the central bank is tightening monetary policy to fight inflation.
Yeah.
And that's what we are seeing in some advanced countries
In
today.
1970s, maybe.
In the 70s especially. That part we learn a lot in our schools.
Yeah.
Case one and case two. But occasionally, borrowers disappear, even with zero interest rates.
Yeah.
And when that happens, we enter what I call case three. And in that case, central bank bring rates down to almost zero. Still, there are no borrowers. And there are two possibilities for that. One is what I call balance sheet recession,
Yeah.
and the other is the pursued economy situation. And the fourth case, that both borrowers and lenders disappear, that happens when you have a major collapse in a bubble, financial crisis.
Yeah.
So banks are hurt because they cannot collect the loans that they extended, and the borrowers are hurt because they were in a bubble. As the prices collapse, all your liabilities are still there, your balance sheet's underwater, so they cannot borrow. So these are the four cases that I talk about. And pursued economy is in the case three. Case three means that even though there are plenty of savers, not enough borrowers, and not enough borrowers because it makes more sense to invest outside the country than inside the country.
Yeah.
So if a Japanese company realize that hey, it's cheaper to build a factory in Vietnam than in Japan, they will be borrowing money in Vietnam to do their investments. So even though this company is maximizing profits, no balance sheet problems, if you look at their domestic operation alone, they're not borrowing money in Japan.
Yeah.
Because what they need is the Vietnamese currency, not the Japanese yen.
That's right.
But when you have companies not borrowing money, but the household sector, household sector is still saving money, so household sector behavior hasn't changed. But the corporate sector behavior changes dramatically once you enter a different stage. Then you get into this pursued economy problems.
Okay.
And the policymakers will have to adjust to this because the private sector is not borrowing money, government might have to borrow money as a borrower of last resort to make sure the economy moves forward.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you recommended the very positive, the fiscal policy to help the economy go outside from the case three, right?
Yes.
Case three. And you can see that you just give a different example. For example, after the collapse of the real estate bubble back to 1990s in Japan, and after the 2008 the subprime crisis in U.S., the two governments do authority use totally different fiscal policy to help the economy. So you think that Japan, the case is, I mean, maybe the stimulus is not enough, but in the American case, you say maybe it's okay. So that will bring different result, right?
Right.
Okay.
In the Japanese case, when the bubble burst and the economy started weakening, nobody knew, not even myself, had any idea what was happening. Because the concept of balance sheet recession was not invented at that point.
You invented it.
Yeah, I invented it, and that was around 1997. So we lost 7 years not knowing what's going on. Bank of Japan brought interest rates up to zero, nothing happens. Central government did some fiscal stimulus, but no Keynesian pump priming. That never happened. Every time you put in the fiscal stimulus, Japanese economy responded.
Yeah, responded.
But when they stopped it, it collapsed again.
That's right.
Whereas what we learn in universities is that when you put in a big fiscal stimulus, that becomes a pump priming. And even after government removed the fiscal stimulus, the economy will continue to grow, right? That's the Keynesian pump priming. That never happened. So people were really lost. When you go to a hospital and the doctors cannot tell which disease you have, you become very worried, right? And that was basically the Japanese situation for a long time. So one doctor says, let's try this. Other doctor says, let's try that. Structural reform, this and that. So they tried lots of structural reform policies. None of them worked. You fix the banking system, the economy is still very slow. Then we finally found out that this is a balance sheet recession. It's a very different kind of recession we never studied in economics. And in this case, private sector who were in the bubble borrow lots of money.
They just want to leverage it.
Exactly, a lot of leveraging. And once the bubble collapsed, all your liabilities are still there. Asset prices are down here. The balance sheet's underwater. Everybody start repairing balance sheets all at the same time. They're all doing the right things. None of them are doing the wrong things. But when everybody does this thing at the same time,
it's complicated.
There's nobody borrowing money. Everybody's saving money, even at zero interest rates. Then the economy starts collapsing. So once I put this all together and try to tell the world that, hey, we have this disease called balance sheet recession that we never studied in economics. At the beginning, most people were very suspicious. I mean, as a former doctoral fellow of the Federal Reserve, I've been going to the Fed to give seminars free of charge because they gave me such a nice fellowship when I was a graduate student. And whenever I talk about balance sheet recession, I was bashed. All the Federal Reserve staff. You're talking nonsense. No, that's a Japanese problem. We'll never have this problem in the United States. But 2008, US fell into balance sheet recession. And suddenly they realized that, oh my gosh, this is what Richard Koo was talking about.
Maybe the guy's right.
Right, and Bernanke actually read my book. And realized that, oh my gosh, this is what we have. So US was able to learn from the Japanese experience and put in the fiscal stimulus. So remember Bernanke in congressional testimonies saying, we don't want to fall off the fiscal cliff. That's basically saying we have to maintain our fiscal stimulus. Now, that was still far from enough, but still far better than nothing. And that's how US recovered from the subprime crisis driven balance sheet recession much faster than Europe. And the Europeans, in spite of my repeated warnings, the top guys, Mr. Schäuble in the German Treasury, basically, finance minister, refused to believe that this is balance sheet recession. Kept on saying this is a structural problem. And as a result, Europe could not put in fiscal stimulus. And so Europe suffered far longer than the United States. It took almost 10 years to reach the same GDP as before 2008. US was able to get there in less than 5 years. So those are the differences between Japan, the United States, and Europe.
Sure, I still memorize that in the time of the financial crisis back to 2008. The John Paulson, I mean the Treasury guys just kneel down to the Speaker Pelosi to give me a huge amount of money. But after this pandemic, you can see that the fiscal policy, the stimulus package is so huge. It's a lot of infrastructure construction projects, something like that. So maybe this is the reason why the American recovered so quickly, because they just already treat the balance sheet recession very quickly.
Yes, I think that's a large part of it. Compared to Europe, for example.
Okay.
Europeans were still worried about balance sheet recession when pandemic hit.
Yeah.
But Americans are mostly finished with the balance sheet recession.
Yeah.
So they were able to move forward faster.
Okay, that's great. So now we turn to Japan's case. So we already noticed very impressive performance of the stock market and the real estate and the inflation rate in Japan, especially last years. So what do you think is kind of the recovery from this so-called balance sheet recession, or just another round of bubble? And what do you think about the role of currency depreciation in this kind of recovery?
Well, I must say that all of this have a lot to do with the currency depreciation.
Yeah.
Because Bank of Japan, believing that monetary policy can solve all the problems, like other traditional economists, kept on this very easy monetary policy, extremely easy monetary policy. Whereas all the other central banks around the world, seeing the inflation coming, raised interest rates. Bank of Japan kept it very low, and as a result, yen began to depreciate. And when the yen fell so much, many foreign investors who kind of written off Japan for so many years suddenly realized that, wow, things in Japan are so cheap.
Yeah, like Warren Buffett.
And Warren Buffett and very many others. But they have told their final investors, we are not interested in Japan because Japan is in such a sad shape.
Yeah.
So now they needed an excuse to come back to Japan because the Japanese equities, Japanese real estate are so cheap.
Yeah.
So they invented a lot of stories that suddenly Japanese companies are doing very well. The structural reform actually worked. And so those were the reasons to come back in to the Japanese market. But those of us sitting in Japan, nothing changed.
Right?
Everything is same as before.
Okay.
But the same as before is actually far better than what a lot of foreigners were writing about.
Okay.
We had very stable prices. People could plan ahead. Our products are still doing very well around the world.
Okay.
Many companies still need Japanese components to finish their iPhones or whatever. People are generally quite happy, and things were cheap. So we had actually quite a nice setups. But because some policymakers, particularly under Prime Minister Abe, said inflation has to be higher, and once the inflation is higher, GDP will be higher. I thought that was, I must say, not appropriate. But those guys basically dominate the Japanese policy thinking. So that forced the Bank of Japan to keep rates very low. Pushed the yen lower, and a lot of foreigners came in. That pushed the stock prices higher, real estate prices higher, as you mentioned. But how about the average Japanese people? They are not happy with the situation, not at all. Because prices are going up, and prices are going up because the yen is so weak, and Japan has to import all this food and fuel from outside. Those prices have also gone up. So you mentioned that Japanese economy is doing well. We had 2 consecutive negative growth, the GDP.
Two.
And the government got so worried that they start talking about another fiscal package, tax cut and things like that. If you do such a large monetary easing, and you still have to do fiscal stimulus, that shows that the monetary policy wasn't working, right? So it only worked through the exchange rate channel, not from the domestic channel. But because the foreigners came in, share prices went up. Of course, some people felt richer as a result, and they spent a little more money. So that part was there. But overall economy, the fact that we had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, together with the need to have another fiscal stimulus, suggests that for domestic economy itself, is not doing all that well. But compared to what foreigners were saying about Japan for the previous 30 years, actual Japan was much better. I mean, if Japan was as bad as how those foreigners describe Japan to be, I would be the first one to have left to Japan. But the fact that I stayed is because I could see that everything's still working, streets are clean, trains are on time, everybody's doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. It was actually a quite good life. for most people.
Okay.
And now, with the prices going up and people are getting worried, and if you have an aging society, you don't want to have an inflation.
Yeah.
Because people really get worried.
Yeah.
Because their income is already fixed.
Sure.
And so, I hope Bank of Japan will come to its senses and normalize monetary policy.
Normalize. Okay.
That may hurt a few things, but overall, I think that's where we should be going.
Okay, so just add a little more questions. You know, maybe the Fed will be lowering the interest rate maybe once or time in this year. So what do you forecast about the Japanese yuan's depreciation or appreciation?
Well, finally, even Japanese government began to worry that the yen has fallen too far.
Okay.
So Japan sent people to the United States to talk about the weakness of the yen. This didn't happen before, right?
Yeah.
So now, finally, even Japanese government, even Bank of Japan are worried that the yen has fallen far too much. Now that the now that the Japanese government is moving to fix the exchange rate, and on the U.S. side too, this is an entirely U.S. part of the picture, but President Biden should be worried about U.S. dollar being too strong.
Too strong, yeah.
That's the key reason why Trump won 2016 presidential election. 2016.
Okay.
2016, the dollar was so strong that there was a call for protectionism all over the United States. And Trump realized that there's a lot of people very unhappy with the strong dollar. And that's how Trump suddenly became such an important candidate.
Okay.
And once Trump started talking about protectionism, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate, had to talk about protectionism also.
Okay. So
that's 2016.
Yeah.
Today, the dollar is also very strong.
So, yeah.
So the Democrats, Biden, those people should be worried that we may end up repeating the mistake of 2016.
Trump come back again,
And then Trump will come back again.
Yeah.
And so now that the inflation rate in the United States is coming down a bit, not sufficiently in my view, but it's coming down, more people should be worried about the strength of the dollar, not to repeat the mistake they made in 2016.
Okay. That's
So
interesting.
then the US and Japan, the interests are coming closer together.
Yeah. So the carriage rate will be reversed or something,
At some point,
Yeah. Okay, so you're just talking about the back of the Trump. So we just were talking about what's your perspective on the competition and the cooperation between the pursued economy and the other catching up economy in current globalization situation? There is any, of course, there's a lot of competition. So there is any kind of cooperation between these two categories of economies?
Pursued economies have to realize that they are pursued, and they have to take appropriate actions. Because if they don't, protectionism will become increasingly more prominent in the advanced countries. And that will hurt the developing countries because they are trying to export to the advanced countries. And if advanced countries all start running toward protectionism, that's not good for the global world. And so both pursued economies as well as the pursuing economies have to be careful with the exchange rate.
Exchange rate, okay.
If the exchange rate is allowed to go too far in the wrong direction meaning the direction that will enlarge trade imbalances. So for now, for the United States, that would be strong dollar. If that is allowed, and all these reaction within the U.S., the labor force, labor workers start going for protectionism, then that will affect all the people who are exporting to the U.S. market, right? So both sides will have to be very careful. U.S. side should not allow the dollar to strengthen too much, and the pursuing economies, that may include China, of course, should not allow the exchange rates to fall too much to make sure that the number of people who wants protectionism in the United States and Europe do not grow to a point where this free trade system is destroyed.
So you just put a very, very important emphasis on these currency exchange rate. But another measure, for example, you just maybe recommend strategy A to the pursuing economy and recommended the strategy B to the pursuing economy. It's different. Maybe the pursuing economy may put more emphasis on the innovation, education, something like that. And then the pursuing economy may be focused on the, how can I say, the exchange rate and the other issues.
Well, so pursued economies will have to really revamp its educational system. And that's one thing the United States failed miserably. In the golden era, you're not pursued economy yet, you're in the golden era. It's the manufacturing that helps the economy grow. And to work in a manufacturing factories, you don't have to have a very high level of education.
That's right,
So when manufacturing is leading the job creation, everyone in the economy benefits. Even with those with relatively little education, they benefit also. So everybody benefits, and that's why I call it that's the golden era.
Blue collar even there.
Yeah, blue collar people will benefit as well as the white collar people. But once you are in the pursuit phase, where manufacturers are moving their factories abroad, then if you have limited education, your job opportunities become smaller and smaller. And you have to have a lot more education, a lot more knowledge, experience to move up on the jobs ladder. But Americans in the 1980s realized that, as I indicated earlier, Japan was chasing the United States and the US was losing so many companies left and right. They did a lot of things to encourage more investors, more companies to invest in the US. That's deregulation, lower taxes. Those were all very helpful.
Reagan's economy.
Yes, Reaganomics they call it. But Reagan forgot to do one thing, and that is to increase the level of education in the United States. And 40 years later, we are paying the price of that mistake. They should have also increased the level of education so that the people will have better job opportunities in this new environment. That part, Europeans have done relatively well. Japanese have done relatively well, keeping the educational levels from deteriorating. Whereas the Americans, they didn't do much on the education, and that's why they're suffering 40 years later.
I got it. Okay, now we turn to China's case, because the book just for most of the reader will be in China. So they just wonder what will happen in China. In this book, I memorized one phase you just talking about, is very important. In the next next decade, China have no space to make any mistake. So a lot of challenge we already know. So what's your recommendation? I mean, the policy combination for China is also already popular for the normal people.
Well, as you know, China faces lots of challenges. One of them, of course, is the possibility that China may fall into balance sheet recession. And what's happening to real estate market and the population taken together. It's very difficult to convince a lot of people in China that real estate prices will continue to go up. But if people don't think real estate prices will continue to go up, they won't borrow money to invest. But if they don't borrow money to invest, but a lot of Chinese people are still saving money, but the people who used to borrow that money are no longer borrowing it, then the economy will fall into what I call balance sheet recession. And if that happens, and in parts of China I think it's already happening, government has to be the borrower and spender of last resort. And I think government is beginning to play that role. I wish that that part stays, or government should do more to assure people that, hey, this is balance sheet recession. Private sector is doing all the right things, which means government cannot expect private sector to change its behavior. In that case, the government will fill the gap, and that's basically the fiscal stimulus. But that alone is not the whole solution, unfortunately, because even before that, before the bursting of the bubble last year and year before, a lot of Chinese companies were not borrowing money from around 2016 to 2022. And if household sector is saving, but the Chinese companies are not borrowing, then you have a balance sheet recession-like situation. And during this whole period, government was borrowing money, especially the regional government, to keep the economy going. But as a result, by the end of 2022, if you look at the general government deficit, not the central government, but the general government deficit, total government, budget deficit was already 7 to 8% of GDP. So if you have already 7 to 8% of GDP before the beginning of balance sheet recession, and then you have balance sheet recession to cope with, and you need another, let's say, 5% GDP fiscal stimulus, the total number will be 12% of GDP. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why so many people are still against government putting the fiscal stimulus, because the budget deficit of the general government is already so large.
And the debt ratio is pretty high.
I don't like this concept of debt ratio. because those of us in the financial industry, we can create debt any way we want.
Okay.
So-called structured financial product, from final saver to final borrower.
Yeah, it's shadow banking system.
Yeah, there are a lot of players.
Yeah.
If you add the debt of all these guys, it's a huge number.
So you're saying the debt ratio is not big, is not important in that, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's only one borrower.
Okay.
At the end, there's only one lender.
Okay.
But in between, there are a lot of debts and a lot of assets.
Okay.
And then the numbers can be very
The
large.
debt is not big, just
And furthermore, how the debt was created is far more important than the size of the debt. If the debt was put in for productive products, productive projects, then the debt is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because as I said at the very beginning, for economic growth, you need debt. If no one's borrowing money and everybody's saving money, economy won't grow, right? Someone has to be borrowing more than his income for economy to grow, as I indicated at the very beginning. So debt is not something bad. It's something essential if the economy is to grow.
Yeah.
The question is whether the debt is used on the good projects instead of bad projects. If it's a bad project, then everybody loses.
Yeah.
Those are the issues that I think China is facing, that budget deficit is already pretty large before the bursting of the bubble. But once the bubble bursts, then you enter balance sheet recession. But the budget deficit is already so large, and so there will be resistance. But we had this resistance in Japan also, 1997 in particular. And people say, oh, the budget deficit is too large, the debt is too large, that argument. So, and the IMF, OECD, who know nothing about balance sheet recession at that time, they understand that now, but in those days they didn't. They told the Japanese government to cut the deficit. And I was already advising Prime Minister Hashimoto at that time. I told Prime Minister, don't cut. If you cut, the whole thing will collapse. But, I'm just a private sector economist, not even Japanese, and all these big shots from around the world, IMF, OECD, told Japan to cut. So he listened to that, and the whole economy collapsed. It took Japan 10 years to come out of that one policy mistake in 1997. So I hope China won't make that kind of mistake.
Okay.
And whether there's enough savings to finance the debt, you look at interest rates, not the size of the debt. If there are a lot of savers, but private sector is not borrowing money, they have to lend to the government. And that's why in a balance sheet recession, one of the key characteristics of balance sheet recession is that government bond yields come down to these very low levels. And China's 10-year bond, 2.4%, which means the government, private sector wants government to borrow. Please don't listen to these people who talk about large debt. You listen to the market. If the market says, 10-year government bond, they're willing to lend it at 2.4%. 2.4% for a country like this is ridiculously low, right? It should be like 5 or 6%. Why is it 2.4? Because people, too much savings relative to the debt.
Yeah, I got you. But China, actually we launched another round of physical stimulus. For example, back to the Southeast Asia financial crisis, we just used a lot of money to build the highway system. After the 2008, we just launched the high-speed train system.
Yes.
Yeah. Nowadays, maybe EV. Now this new round will be, we call it the low-altitude aircraft and the transportation system. So maybe another round kind of stimulus already on the way. So you don't think it's still enough for the whole economy?
Well, if that depends on what the private sector is doing, right? If private sector is really not borrowing money, but the household sector still saving money, and then all the indications indicate that Chinese household sector is still saving a lot of money. So someone has to borrow this thing to keep the economy going. And so I would recommend that Chinese government put together the best and the brightest people like you into a committee and ask them to come up with a project.
What's the best project for the future's growth, right?
Exactly. Anything that earns more than the social rate of return of 2.4% should be put into place. 2.4 because of the government bond yield is 2.4. And if those projects earn social rate of return higher than 2.4, this will not become the burden on future taxpayers, right? Because this is self-financing. And so if you bring smart people in China like yourselves together and discuss, okay, this project will earn 2.4, this project is only 1.2, let's not do it. That's the kind of discussions I think this country needs.
That's good advice. When talking about the economic study itself, I just read the book. You recommend something, the pure technical, the math, something math heavy. Okay, just a concept and a lot of math formula, something like that. You just put on to the real economy, which was ask a lot of normal people to ask why and study from the very beginning. And we are economists. We know the only data we can get is from the history, from the many history from the UK, from the Japan, from America. So what's you currently researching project, or would you have any view or prediction on the future trend in economic studies?
Well, we can talk about this for another 1 hour.
Okay.
Trying to describe economy with the mathematical models, I don't know how much of that you do.
Yeah.
It's a very roundabout way of getting to the problem.
It's a physical way, actually. Physicist way.
Yeah, the physicist. And the physicist can do that because the moon does not change its direction.
Yeah.
You can predict exactly where the moon is going to be 2,000 years from now.
Right.
But humans change their behavior all the time, every minute. After hearing my talk, you may change your behavior. After hearing your talk, I might change my behavior. These things happen all the time. To try to describe this mathematically, in my view, is completely nonsense.
Insane.
It's insane, as you said.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we don't have to be, we throw away all our scientific methods. Because medical science, human beings, it consists of billions of cells, and they're all moving in a different direction all the time. But once you observe certain patterns, you know how to cure this disease. And I think economics should be learning from medical science, not physics.
Yeah.
Because we can learn a lot from all the numbers we already have. And so I recommend that government should be more careful with collecting numbers, especially those borrowings that goes to real investments, not to buy houses or stocks. Those borrowings do not add to GDP, but these borrowings add to GDP. But no government is collecting the distinction between the two. And I wish Chinese government or US government will collect this data from the banks, asking banks, okay, what is this borrowing for? Is this for buying properties or for real investments? Because that number will be very, very useful. And the other thing I'm really concerned about is whether free trade will survive.
Free trade,
With this much tensions already in the system, and people like Trump coming up and openly against free trade, if he becomes the president again, free trade could be in big trouble. And that is not what we like to see. So I wish economists become more realistic about what has to, in the free trade we learned that free trade always benefits. Free trade creates both winners and losers in the same economy, but the gain of the winners are always greater than the loss of the losers. So the economy together should benefit. But no one told us in universities that for that conclusion to be true, the trade must be in balance or in surplus. If the trade is in deficit, the number of losers continue to grow. And US had a deficit for over 40 years. So how do you expect US to continue free trade when so many people in the United States think that they are losers of free trade? So we have to stop this. And collectively, Asian countries keep the exchange rate from falling instead of pushing it higher. I think that would be very useful to limit the number of people who consider themselves losers in the United States. And that will keep the free trade from being destroyed.
So, Ms. Gu, I wonder what's your part about India's economy and the growth momentum is still there?
Well, India, I think it's finally coming together. It got its act together, as it were, so that many foreign companies are now finding India to be a good place to invest. That was not the case 10 years ago, 15 years ago. India was a very difficult place for foreign companies to do anything. Now it has fixed some of these legal issues and infrastructure issues. However, I have been to India a few times, and in the cities, India is great. It looks great. Once you go to the countryside, you see something completely different. Of course, most Indians still live in the countryside. And for that country to get its act together, not just in the cities, but bring all the people in the countryside for the economic growth, that may take a while. And that's, I think, a big difference between China and India. In China, even in the countryside, people who have opportunity to study will study very hard and try to catch up and move higher. That is not the case in the countryside of India. In that sense, even though India has just as large population as the Chinese, the amount of people who are really up to support economic growth, that proportion may be much smaller than in China, where even in the countryside, the kids are studying very hard. That is not what you see in Indian countryside. So my guess is that yes, India will continue to do well, but it's going to be a while before it will come anywhere near where China is today.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a great conversation. It's given me a lot of hints and
I learned a lot
insight
from you
into
too,
the
yes.
economy. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. Yeah.
Okay.
解读君备注：综合整理可以看到，许多中国人开始还债，而不是借钱，因为如果房价不持续上涨，你不想背负巨额债务，这才是最合理的。但如果每个人都开始同时偿还这笔钱，我担心中国会进入资产负债表衰退。因此，如果关于中国和日本之间的比较的第一个问题是关于资产负债表衰退，那么我的回答是：是的。中国可能会进入资产负债表衰退，而这将是一个非常痛苦的过程，可能需要很多年才能完全解决资产负债表问题，人们也需要很多年才能克服这种债务创伤。但是，中国和日本的情况有一大不同，那就是中国人已经意识到这种现象叫做资产负债表衰退，而30年前的日本人并不知道这种现象，不知道他们面对着什么样的问题。我也是被动知道了这些事情。用一位中国教授的话说，现在有近一半的在中国写的博士论文是关于资产负债表衰退整个概念的。好吧，我其实还没有获得博士学位，但如果很多中国学生根据我的研究获得了博士学位，那也还不赖。因此，如果中国的经济学家，尤其是政策制定者，能够意识到这个问题并知道如何应对它，也就是说，不要把时间浪费在货币政策上，不要把时间浪费在结构性改革上，而是应该将所有精力都放在财政刺激上，以保持经济的运转。这样的话，即使中国正在经历资产负债表衰退，损害也会被降到最小， GDP 不会大幅下降。如果政策制定的正确的话，也即会有稳定的财政刺激的话，相比日本的20年，中国能够更早地走出资产负债表衰退困境。所以这是一个中国和许多其他国家之间的很大的区别。2008年后的美国及欧洲都曾经陷入资产负债表衰退，非常严重的衰退，但美国人在2008年后大约1到2年才意识到他们正处于资产负债表衰退中。这种发展趋势令人极其不安，因为今天的中国正处于经济发展的阶段，公司应该借钱，应该扩大他们的工厂，应该扩大他们的业务，增加他们的研发预算等等。因为中国现在还处于工资上涨的阶段，就像80年代甚至70年代的日本一样。所以对于中国公司来说，借钱扩大业务，然后击败中国台湾、日本、韩国或其他地方的竞争对手是非常有意义的。但突然你发现那并没有发生，而且是在泡沫破裂之前。如果泡沫在2016年破裂，然后中国企业开始这样运营，这是完全可以理解的。但实际上泡沫到了2022年才破裂，但即使在泡沫破灭之前，中国企业就不再借钱，这在很多方面都令人非常不安。中国从2016年到最近一段时间的经济表现，实际上经济增长很大程度上依赖政府支出的支持，它并不完全来自非政府部分，所以政府过去一直在支撑经济。现在中国正在进入资产负债表衰退之中，正如我所说，资产负债表衰退需要相当大的政府支出来确保 GDP 不崩溃，这意味着中国政府将不得不在已经很大的财政赤字情况下继续扩大负债，这对中国金融行业来说可能是一个相当大的挑战。你能在金融市场里找到的唯一的东西，唯一的资产就是政府债券。公司不是在修复资产负债表，就是基本上不借钱，正如您在此图表中看到的那样。那么为什么中国企业在泡沫破裂之前就不借钱呢？这是我们所有人不得不去了解并解决的事情，这样政府就不必借那么多钱来支持未来的经济。所以中国公司在泡沫破裂前5年或前6年就停止借贷，这是我们真正需要关注的事情。最后，近期阿里巴巴系旗下的长桥证券有非常好的福利，大陆的身份护照就可以开户，开户注册之后还能协助免费网上办理新加坡银行卡，只需要护照就能开立新加坡银行 OCBC， 而且现在开户有赠金和送股票等新人福利，非常值得参加。有兴趣开户和开新加坡银行卡的，可以参见视频下方的描述栏开户长桥证券。